river belongs now to the towboat. The fabled steamboat of Mark Twain's day has rounded the bend, and its glorious day is past. The face of the river changes, but not the need for Americans at work. Men who can keep the towboats pushing upstream or downstream with a string of barges a quarter of a mile long moving out in front of them. The river towboat never tows, it pushes. Once barges were lashed to steamboats or were towed by tugboats. Because its job is to move barges, the name towboat has stuck to the powerful workhorse of the river. By pushing his cargo ahead, the pilot of the boat has a clear view of the river and of his load, which may be several times as big as a football field. Towboats and their tows are longer than the largest ocean-going ship, and they can move more bulk cargo more economically than can any other kind of transportation. The primary area in which they work is the Mississippi and the rivers and canals that feed into it. Along these waterways are concentrated many industries that consume enormous quantities of petroleum products. Coal transported in huge black mounds. Steel products, including heavy pig iron. And bulk chemicals such as sulfur. Deckhands everywhere need to be handy with rope. For docking, there's no substitute for it. Modern towboats are propelled by diesel engines as powerful as those on many ocean liners. These are kept responsive to the pilot's sensitive handling of the controls by the engineer and his crew. These posts on the decks are still called timberheads, even though today they are made of metal. The towboat takes on more than barges. At stops along the way, deckhands bring aboard provisions. The towboat deckhand is never very far from land and seldom very far from the water. Most of the men who work the towboats come from the small towns and farms along the river. They start, usually, because it's a job with good pay, good food, a place to sleep. If they don't like it, they drop out after a trip or two. If they stay on longer than that, the river becomes their life, a career that can lead to advancement to mate, master, or pilot. Pulling up to a town to drop or pick up barges and then leaving in an hour or so. This is a cycle repeated again and again by the pilot and his crew. A towboat may make as many as a dozen stops during the trip. Towboats make good use of radar in a river crowded and bustling with big boats and with little boats. Radar is used primarily in foggy weather to keep river traffic moving safely. What's the depth? Out on the barges, the leadsman takes soundings to find out. He uses a line weighted with lead and marked with colored cloth or leather at key depths. The line is 33 feet long, but to the leadsman, any depth greater than 24 feet is no bottom, far deeper than a towboat could ever need. The chant of the leadsman is the language of the river. For 22.5 feet, his call is quarter less 4. For 16.5 feet, quarter less 3. For 12 feet, Mark Twain, a phrase that later became the pen name for a riverboat pilot, Samuel Langhorne Clemens. For the towboat, there are many trips through the river's locks. This is familiar work for the experienced deckhand. It starts with the long walk out on the barges, carrying a teletalk, known on the river as a tattletale. With it, the deckhand can carry on a two-way conversation with the pilot 1,000 feet back. The tattletale is a useful instrument, but its efficiency ended a delightful river custom. In earlier days, bargemen chanted their observations back through a megaphone, and the riverbanks echoed with their songs. Without locks, the upper Mississippi and the rivers that feed into it could not be navigated by modern towboats. But if the lock is the riverman's friend, it is an exacting friend, demanding of pilot and crew patience, proficiency, and coolness in the face of danger. A pilot often has to steer a tow 105 feet wide into a lock only 110 feet wide. The pilot on the towboat and the deckhand out on the barges must work together closely. If the pilot has little margin for error, the deckhand has little margin for safety while securing the tow inside the lock. Today's tows are so large, many of them are longer than the locks. In this case, they are broken into two sections and taken through separately. Then, deckhands must put them back together again, fastening them so securely that tows containing as many as 20 barges are combined with the towboat to steer as one unit. These steel cables, chains, and ratchets they work with are called river jewelry. It's hot work in summer out where the metal barges and the steel cables hold the heat. In winter, it's dangerous work when a rainstorm is whipped in by high winds, coating men and barges with ice. Deckhands wear life jackets as one part of a safety program conducted jointly by the maritime unions and the owners of the barge lines. They work a schedule that's different from the hours of land-based people. On a trip, they work a 12-hour day, 6 hours on a watch and 6 hours off. And they work every day of the week for as long as the journey continues. Once a given trip is over, they are entitled to a day off with pay for every day they have worked. To the people he passes along the way, both ashore and on the riverboat pilot is a legendary figure. He presides over his part of the river world with complete authority, his eye ever alert to the changing face of the river. Mark Twain, the voice of all the riverboat pilots, once wrote, "There is one faculty which a pilot must incessantly cultivate until he has brought it to absolute perfection. That faculty is memory. He cannot stop with merely thinking a thing is so-and-so. He must know it." This, for example, is a point to be filed away in his memory. Where he sees the Corps of Engineers at work, he knows he can expect an improved channel, perhaps in time for his next trip. One of the features of towboat life that all rivermen like is mealtime. Unlike the offshore vessels, meals on many riverboats are prepared by women. The comforts of home? Why not? To a towboatman, his boat is home. The women enjoy their jobs on the river. There's a special excitement to being on a boat and to feeling they belong there. They are members of the same unions as the men. When they prepare a meal, they can be sure it will be appreciated. A towboat considered a good feeder guarantees a happy and hard-working crew. Towboat workers are not reluctant eaters. They work hard, they eat well. There's a saying, too, that the towboatman who's thin just hasn't been on the river very long. Sometimes it seems the boat hardly pushes through one lock before another appears. On the upper Mississippi, there are 27. On the Ohio, close to 50. The pilot is always looking ahead, preparing the tow for the next maneuver, even as he is executing the present one. Getting in shape, this is called. He has to get in shape for a bend, for a bridge, for a landing, for a lock, or for a crossing where another river joins his. From the long experience he needs to earn his license, the pilot knows he cannot steer a tow as he would a light boat. He knows he can never work against the river. The force of a great river is an awesome thing. He has to work with it, making it do big part of his job for him. The river is an ideal place for recreation, but not to a man on watch. There's no end to work to be done on the towboat. While one deckhand cleans the searchlight, another splices rope. Like the river itself, the work goes on and on. Landmarks. The riverman knows their importance. Without a point of reference, one spot on the river is like another. It is the face of the land that tells the pilot where he is. Father of Waters. This is the name the Indians gave the mighty river flowing through the heart of America. A river of folklore, legend, and song. A river great in its own right, but greater still because of the people in the past who have made its life part of our national heritage. Greater still because of the people today who make the river live for the enrichment of all. The towboat workers, organized members of the maritime unions of the Afl-Cio. Americans at work. For you. Americans at Work, presented as a public service by the Afl-Cio. Next week, another story of Americans at Work. Americans whose skill and effort help keep our country great and strong.